goals/objectives for the day. By the end of today, you'll be able to define digestion in terms of our class. And then you will also be able to explain how digestion looks just a little bit different for each of the macromolecules, because they don't all get digested in the same places or at the same time in the process. Okay? The food that you eat is fuel for your body. We know that. We've discussed that already. But the parts of your body that actually need that fuel are the individual cells in your body. Okay? Your muscles need energy, but it's specifically the muscle cells that need energy. Okay? Your nervous system needs energy, but it's specifically the nerve cells that need that energy in order to do their jobs so your body functions. But the problem is that your cells can't use a ham sandwich as the form of a ham sandwich. Your cells don't have any mechanisms to use ham sandwiches to fuel them. So if you're going to eat a ham sandwich, how does it get into a form that your body cells can actually use? Well, the molecules in your food, big as they are, even after they break it down so it no longer looks like a ham sandwich, those molecules are still too big. The molecules we've been talking about, like carbohydrates and lipids and proteins, they're those long polymer molecules, right? Where it's chains of these pieces and they're too big for your cells to use. So even after we break it down and it stops looking like a sandwich and starts looking like molecules, even those molecules are too big. So something has to happen to them in order for your body cells to be able to use them. They are too big to pass through the tissue of your large intestine. So if you've never studied digestion before, you probably don't know this, but most of the absorption of molecules and food and things happens in your large intestines. What happens is your molecules move from the large intestines out into the blood supply and then are pumped into your body cells through the blood supply. Well, if the molecule is too big to pass from the intestines into the blood supply, then it can't get delivered to the rest of your body. So those molecules have to be smaller. And the same thing, even if they were able to get into the blood supply, by the time they got to your body cells, they would still be too big to be used. So we have to, in some way, make those those molecules small enough for your body to process them. I should ask if everybody's good there. In order to be used, molecules have to undergo digestion, which is a word I've already used a couple of times today, so we'll define it. Digestion is the process of breaking down food into smaller molecules. So in order to get those molecules smaller, they have to be broken down. They have to be digested. For the large macromolecules, the process of digestion begins with a separate process that's called hydrolysis. Hydrolysis is the splitting apart of a polymer into smaller molecules. So we talked about how all of those macromolecules, carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, are all polymers, meaning they are made up of lots of little subunits chained together like train cars on a train. And in order to be used, hydrolysis uses water to break down the bonds between those smaller molecules and break them into pieces. It's sort of the opposite of when those molecules are formed. Enzymes are involved in this process, and they greatly speed up hydrolysis. So as we talk about each of the macromolecules, you're going to see they each have their own special enzyme that helps this process kick off. We'll begin our discussion of digesting the macromolecules with starches because they are the easiest and therefore the first group to get broken down. They even begin breaking down in your mouth. So if you recall at the beginning of the chapter, we sampled some carbohydrates and noticed that as we chewed them, the longer we chewed them, the sweeter they got in our mouths. And that's because there's an enzyme called amylase that's found in your saliva, and it begins the process of digestion on the carbohydrates even in your mouth. And it breaks those starches, those long chains, down into their complex sugars. So you go from having a starch to having a sugar in your mouth, and as a result, the taste changes. Then, as the food continues through your body, in your small intestine, digestion is completed, and those complex sugars are broken down even further into the simple sugar glucose. And this is very important because glucose is the fuel that your cells can use. So your cells can actually use glucose to get energy and fuel them. They have mechanisms for breaking glucose down and releasing the energy from it. Next, let's talk about proteins. Okay. Not as easy to break down as starches, so they have to get to your stomach before digestion really begins on protein. Okay. The enzyme pepsin that's in your stomach helps break down proteins into smaller chains of amino acids. So they're still in chains at this point, but the chains are significantly smaller by the time this enzyme is done with them. Then those proteins go to the small intestine, and there's an enzyme there called protease. Well, several enzymes. And they break down those chains, those smaller chains, into actual individual single amino acids. Those amino acids can then be absorbed into your bloodstream and carried off to cells, and then those cells can assemble those amino acids into new proteins that help build your body. Okay, so lots of structures in your body are built from proteins produced by your cells using the amino acids from the food that you eat, which you'll remember your body can produce some amino acids, but not all of them. So it's very important to get protein in your diet so that you can get those essential amino acids that your body will need to build proteins. Last and the most complex to digest are fats. Of all the macromolecules, these are the hardest to break down, and that is because, as we learned yesterday cleaning up from our lab, they can't be dissolved in water. Okay? You may have experienced this if you've ever tried to mix oil and water together, right? They may turn into lots of little tiny bubbles inside of each other, but if you leave them, they eventually settle out. They just don't mix. So that's part of the problem with digesting these, because you remember hydrolysis relies on the use of water to break them down. So if they don't dissolve in water, this process becomes more difficult. Fat digestion begins in your stomach. In your stomach, these large droplets of fat have to get made into small droplets of fat so that there's more surface area and they are able to affect all of the fat equally. Okay? And the bile salts that your liver produces are excreted into your stomach, and then you can, these bile salts, what they do is they take those big droplets of fat and they make them into lots of tiny little droplets of fat by keeping them from joining together. Then there's an enzyme called lipase, which is used in fat hydrolysis, and it breaks those fats down into glycerol and fatty acids, which can then be absorbed and taken to the rest of your body for use. So that is digestion.